with NTech Strategies and the Research Experience in Carbon Sequestration, and Dr. Vikram Rushal with the National Center of Excellence in CCU, as well as the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Both of them are also contributing authors for the CCUS handbook. The CCUS handbook can be found at this website. Do encourage everyone to take a look at the chapter in more detail, while our guest speakers will be covering several topics within chapter 3. That handbook and that chapter itself is a more thorough resource. Again, thanks to our funder for all of this work, the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Energy Resources, as well as the several institutional contributors, both in author capacity and review capacity. With that, I'll turn it over to our experts to talk about Chapter 3. One thing I will note is you'll see that Chapter 3 on project engagement is one of the first chapters in the book, and that was intentional when the authors came together to draft this handbook. So we felt collectively that this is a really, really important topic for CCUS deployment. So with that, Vikram and Pam, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya. And this is an important chapter, as mentioned. We talk about different technical aspects of and the commercial aspects, but an important element of CCUS is engagement. For throughout the process of the project lifetime, even before it starts, actually for implementation, we have to look into these aspects of engagement. So key takeaway is the definition of engagement itself. That's basically the process of involving policymakers, regulators, project developers, and the public in communication across the life of a project. Unfamiliarity or a lack of awareness of carbon capture, utilization, and storage as a climate mitigation technology may be problematic for the success and deployment of the projects. At a simplified level, insufficient information about project development, technologies that are involved in the project, the background to the project, or the decision-making process can lead to a lack of acceptance or support amongst the surrounding communities. Therefore, communication and engagement are key elements of deploying CCUS projects. Pam?
So a really important first step is to understand who you need to engage. And this requires a mapping exercise. This will help you to really determine who the stakeholders are, where they are, and what type of engagement may be needed. It's really important also just to understand any potential legacy issues. Many communities where projects may be sited, they may be familiar with industrial infrastructure that exists there, may be familiar with oil and gas operations, but many may also have negative experiences with extractive industries and industries in general. And so it's really critical that as you engage in these projects, that you become familiar with what those legacy issues may be in communities. So do your homework, know as much as you can about the community, and embed this process very early in the process of project planning and development. Next slide. So again, we can't emphasize the importance of engagement enough. It's not a new concept. Very often as project developments take place, a project developer would engage with the community and inform about project developments. But the process itself has really evolved more into a really important two-way conversation with the communities. So as we suggest here and we discuss throughout the chapter, that the risk of meaningfully engaging in this can impact your project significantly, but it's important to get those inputs up front. So structuring the process right from the beginning. Next slide.
Yeah, so we cannot emphasize enough about the importance of engagement, and we need to look into some of the core principles that are there for effective engagement. And that is critical to establishing open lines of communication, informing the stakeholders about potential risks and benefits, addressing questions and concerns, and then what are the perceived risks, to exchange the ideas, cultivate knowledge, and building trusted relationships for a long-term collaboration engagement. It also raised the awareness and build the influence and support policy aspects. So this slide is presenting a non-exhaustive list of key principles for CCUS engagement. And based on large number of experience that that particularly the authors kind of came with in this writing this book. So the first and foremost element is on the transparency. So like share factual information, developments, community impacts, and the potential risks and benefits in a quite clear and open, direct manner, and provide the public with the summarizing the record of the events. We need to understand the communities. Project developers might recognize the issues facing any community, and as the project develops, they will become part of the community. Different communities engage with information and communicate differently, and this may require diverse communications, engagement strategies within the project. It's important to engage early and often to identify the level of need and the appropriate frequency forum for engagement. Then there is this decision making to include the community in the decision making process and vet the project with technical peers at different channels such as the symposia, technical events, and so on. And therefore, further, we have this collaboration and partnerships to actively build these among diverse groups that may be there and the individuals to share, to advance the shared goals. Next slide, please. Yeah, going ahead, we need to connect with the big picture. So clearly communicate why CCUS and to connect with the activities in the big picture. Then there are different community benefits that may be associated. So we have to look beyond the property owners to the other members in the community, including how the CCUS project can provide opportunities for the underserved, the minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses. Further, it's important to measure the or survey the impact. So include measurable success metrics to understand how engagement activities impact stakeholders over time, and evaluate to understand what is working and what is not, and revise accordingly. The clarity has to be brought forward. So understandable graphics, including unexaggerated depth scales to relay distance is important. And we have talked earlier about the capacity building aspect as a whole. So there are different aspects that we need to look into. And an important case study here is the Houston CCS Alliance and their efforts for engagement. The Houston area has pretty much become one of the most concentrated sources of CO2 emissions in the US, and making it ideal for development of large-scale CCS projects. And in 2021, 11 of these largest industrial CO2 emitters formed this Houston CCS Alliance. And the community engagement is an important element of the Houston CCS Alliance engagement efforts. Next slide, please.
So there are key players that typically fall into four primary spheres. So you'll have policymakers, regulators, project developers, and communities. And communities can be broken down into many communities as well. And it's important to note that these spheres of key players, they're very dynamic, and they often will engage with one another. And the nature of the different activities are highlighted on the table, and we go into that in detail in the book. But the point I want to make is that there is a tremendous amount of overlap and exchange going on among these key players that will interact throughout the life cycle of a CCUS project, whether it's related to the regulatory process, the public comment inputs that are required for that, decision making, and this general updates related to project developments. So very active and dynamic among all of these players throughout pretty much the life cycle, but at different points in time. And I think we address that in the next slide.
So this figure basically talks about engagement, and we clearly can see that on the axis, horizontal axis, we see that the lifetime of the CCS project. So there is a site selection point here, and it goes with the development, the operations, closure, and post-closure. And even before that, there is a level of engagement that is also fairly high among different key players. So we have these players listed as the regulators, the policymakers, the project developers, and then the community. So as mentioned, the engagement should be an ongoing process with the key players throughout the project's lifetime. So engagement starts even before site selection and is maintained through across all these stages. So we do understand, as the authors of this this book here, that not all engagement will follow a natural curve that is being represented here. As an event during operations may result in a spike in engagement, or after development, the level of engagement may decrease due to competing issues that the stakeholders may face. Nevertheless, building relationships take time, effort, transparency, and planning. And at different levels of engagement among the stakeholders in the community at large will be very, very vital and important for throughout the project's lifetime. Next slide, please. So then there are these engagement processes. So community focus is the important element. So the core principles and key players for a CCUS project are being shown here. So there are different outreach methods and what they are, the advantages and the shortcomings of having each of these methods in place. So consider understanding who your constituents are through mapping and surveys, and next tailor the outreach techniques based on the type of message and community makeup. There are many approaches and alternatives for engagement, and understanding these processes are dependent on developing a good understanding of matters important to the local communities and these stakeholders. So direct engagement is required, and we have to look into different aspects again. What all the activities have to be looked into, whether we are talking about surveys and so set up questions to gauge how the community feels, public gathering, targeted outreach, then there are technical outreach, and to local media, newspapers, and websites, flyers, and ads. So all of them have their own set of advantages that need to be used for a strong engagement with the community, and ensuring that the channels of communications are open throughout the lifetime of the project and beyond. Next slide, please.
So there are a variety of ways to share and exchange information with stakeholders. I'll often say that a project moves at the pace of trust. And so ensuring that you're constantly working to build trust and applying those methods that we discussed earlier in your process is really key. There are some case studies that show how poor community engagement can turn out. That's the Netherlands case study there that you might want to check out. But kind of, there's no one way to do stakeholder engagement. But as a general guideline, you want to meet with your key leaders in the beginning and really understand what the important issues are that might require additional attention within the community. We pointed out earlier, stakeholder mapping to provide a framework that just identifies the different individuals and groups that you will need to engage in the process. And to focus on this two-way communication method, in addition to your traditional website information and different forums. And a number of project developers have also taken to having a direct presence in the community and actually becoming a part of it. So we see project developers hiring someone from the local community, opening an office and having open office hours to allow community members to come in, learn about the project, share about concerns or questions that they may have. So these are just some examples of typical ways that you might think about community-focused engagement. Again, the handbook goes into a little more detail into different ways to do that. Next slide.
Thank you, Pam and Vikram, so much for sharing your thoughts on this important chapter. Again, a huge thanks to our funder for all of this work, the State Department Bureau of Energy Resources. And stay tuned for the next recording in this series, Chapter 4 on capacity building. Thank you.